Hello, Dr. Manishika Jain.
Welcome to Examrace YouTube. Today we would be talking about the class 10 science, the 15th chapter that talks about environment. We have been understanding this topic since our very early childhood. Today we would be doing a quick recap of all the concepts under environment. So our focus area would be understanding environment, ecosystem, the components of the ecosystem, talking about managing the garbage, ozone, the ozone depletion. So these would be the highlights for today. Now coming on to the brain teasers, we have some of the very interesting questions here for you. If you are able to answer these, you are all set with the chapter. Else let's proceed. So one of the important questions that I would like to point here is how much energy is being absorbed by the sun and how much is transmitted to the next level is a very important confusion that most of the students usually face. Another question is, what would the case where you would prefer a cotton bag rather than a plastic bag? So talking about the issues of biodegradable vis-a-vis non-biodegradable, talking about natural ecosystem vis-a-vis an artificial ecosystem, why we need to clean the artificial ecosystems like aquarium but not the natural ecosystems. They are self-sustaining in themselves. So what are the harmful practices that have led to depletion of or the poor conditions of the agricultural land? So all those would be the topics that we would focus. Let's begin our journey with the very first topic, that is ecosystem. Now ecosystem, what do you understand by the term ecosystem? Ecosystem is, I can say, a simple interaction between the biotic and the abiotic components. Biotic means the living components, the plants, the flora and the fauna, that's the animals. Abiotic could be in the form of rainfall, wind, pressure conditions, soil, minerals. And when these two interact, you have the living organisms that can grow, they can reproduce, they can interact with the surrounding environment. This ecosystem can either be a natural ecosystem or an artificial ecosystem. Natural ecosystem, a good example would be a forest area, a mountain area. Artificial ecosystem, we can say, could be a cropland or an aquarium. Let's move into the world of aquarium. I have numerous fishes around me. What would happen if the population would suddenly increase? They won't have enough space. So what's required? First, space. Second, water. Third, oxygen. Fourth, food. Now, to have oxygen, what we would have some plants out here. So, we would try to make this ecosystem self-sustaining. But this plant would slowly and gradually decay. Similarly, the fishes might die out. So what we require is a manual cleaning of this ecosystem. We cannot say this is self-sustaining. However, on the other hand, a natural ecosystem like a pond or a lake can be self-sustaining. So this is something that's really important to understand. Let me bring a big shark into this aquarium. What would happen? It would eat away all the small fishes around, and then again this aquarium cannot be sustained. So there has to be kind of equilibrium between the types of organism, the hierarchy in the organism that could be seen, and this is through the grouping of organisms that we understand. So we have the producers which generate their own food. They are also called as autotrophs. The next level is the heterotrophs. These could be primary, secondary and tertiary consumers, which are herbivorous, carnivorous and so on. So you have the decomposers finally. Now let's talk about the producers first. Green plants in presence of sunlight have the capability to manufacture their own food by consuming carbon dioxide. This process is what is known as photosynthesis. By the process of photosynthesis, plant provides oxygen and creates their own food. Now this process is the self-sustaining process for the producers or the autotrophs. In this process, how much energy do they absorb from the sun? They absorb just 1% of the energy. So let's say you have 50,000 kilojoules of energy coming from the sun. How much energy would pass on to the next level, that's the green plants, is 500 kilojoules. From this 500 kilojoules, you would have the primary consumers, those are the heterotrophs. So you would have primary consumers. How much energy would go there? Now 1% energy to the green plants, but with the next successive levels, it's 10% of the energy that is passed on. So from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer, it's again 10% of the energy. So this 50 kilojoules would transfer 500 kilojoules, you would have 50 kilojoules to the primary consumer and 5 kilojoules to the secondary consumer. This 10% of the energy that takes place, or the transfer that takes place, is in the form of chemical energy and has been explained by Lindemann, hence called as Lindemann's 10% law. So with each successive trophic level, so these are called as trophic levels, you have the producers, next to producers you have primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and so on and so forth. So this is where you have the energy flow that occurs. Now we talk about these grouping of the organisms so far. So let's say you have green plants being consumed by grasshopper, grasshopper being consumed by frog, frog being consumed by a snake, and this is what is known as food chain. But on the other hand, this grasshopper could be consumed by multiple organisms. Those could again be consumed by multiple organisms. So rather than one organism being consumed only by the next organism, we have this organism which would be consumed by multiple organisms, and this is what is known as a web. So similar to a spider web, you can understand this as a food web. So you have interrelationships that are present with the food web that we understand. So food chain and food web become a very important concept. Under the food chain, we would have the trophic level. The highest energy would be seen in the first trophic level, that is the producers, and the energy would decrease with the subsequent trophic level. With every trophic level, you would have 10% of the energy that would pass on, and that is in the form of chemical energy. And the last stage would be the decomposers, as we talked about. Decomposers, the role is very important. They break down the complex organic compounds into simple inorganic compounds, and that's a very, very important question for you. So the organic compounds are broken down into inorganic compounds which are mixed with the soil. So that's the role of the decomposers that is seen. So we talked about food chain, food web, autotrophs, heterotrophs, the food web, and the decomposers. Now let's talk about the energy flow. What do you understand in terms of flow of energy? Can the energy flow back from a frog to a grasshopper? Obviously no. So energy flow is unidirectional. It only moves from T1, that's the trophic 1, to the trophic level 2 and the trophic level 3. So one very important thing, energy flow is unidirectional. Second most important thing, with each trophic level you have the loss of energy that is registered with each successive trophic level. The next important thing we would talk today is the progressive accumulation that occurs. So you have pesticides that are washed into the soil. Now this pesticide goes into the body of let's say the plants. The fruits from these plants are being consumed by humans directly. Let's say take a simple example. So with each trophic level, what happens is you have the accumulation of the pesticides in the next level that takes place, and this is what is known as biological magnification. So what is biological magnification is again a very, very important question that you need to answer here. The next is the idea and the concept of ozone layer. Ozone is a very important and an interesting gas. So oxygen, we write it as O2. Ozone, we write it as O3. So three atoms of oxygen together would form ozone. Now this ozone, if present in the lower layers, acts as a pollutant. So it's harmful for human beings. But when this ozone is present in the stratosphere, that's the layer above the troposphere, it prevents the harmful ultraviolet B radiations mainly. So ultraviolet, there are A, B, C and different varieties we could say. So mainly the ultraviolet B and C are protected through the ozone, and these ultraviolet rays, if they reach onto the earth, they can lead to problems like skin cancers, skin diseases, problems of immunity. So those are some of the major issues that are addressed by the ozone layer. Now what's happening over the years is this ozone is being affected by the CFC or the chlorofluorocarbons. Now what happens with the CFC? The chlorofluorocarbons are being emitted into the atmosphere through the refrigerants, through the fire extinguishers. In 1987 there was a ratification that was brought around to cease the production of CFCs, and now we have talked about CFC free refrigeration facilities that are being released. Now when you have ozone that breaks down into oxygen and oxygen free radical, but when this ozone reacts with CFC, it forms ClO free radical, that is chloroxide, and this basically is harmful to the ozone layer and it depletes the ozone layer. We have seen an ozone hole in Antarctica. That's a very recent example to understand the problem of ozone and is important from the environmental perspective. The next important issue is managing garbage. So we have the garbage which could be classified as biodegradable and non-biodegradable. Biodegradable is one which can be biologically broken down. So all the food we can say is biodegradable. On the other hand, plastics is non-biodegradable because it cannot be broken down into simple compounds very easily. So enzymes are required to break down this biodegradable compounds. So we as a human being, when we digest, when we consume, we break down the organic matters, and that's through the enzymes that are being secreted. The specific enzymes do the specific role in the process of breakdown that we'll understand in the higher classes. But that's the reason, one of the primary reasons we can say we don't consume coal. Okay, so when we are trying to consume materials which can be broken down by the enzymes, we are basically focusing on the biodegradable materials. So biodegradable and non-biodegradable become important. Non-biodegradable, as we said, we use cotton bags rather than plastic bags because cotton bags are biodegradable. They can be reused. They are much more environmental friendly. They lead to lesser pollution as compared to plastic bags. Similarly, we talked about one of the questions on the harmful effects of agricultural land. So here what happens is when you have fertilizers, pesticides flowing into the water, it's affecting or leading to biomagnification. You have problems of soil fertility that's there. Overcropping has led to reduced fertility. So those are some of the harmful practices that are prevalent in the agricultural lands. So all these are the issues that revolve in and around the environment, and we as human beings have certain anthropogenic causes or human induced causes that have led to depletion or the deterioration of the environmental scenarios. So we'll be covering many more chapters in science. Stay tuned. Have a wonderful day ahead.